A man walks barefoot on shattered granite, staring at a weed that bleeds light but will not burn, at the golden architecture hidden inside the temple, at what actually happens to the human body in the book, in the center of the inferno. And the king notices something terrifying about the fourth figure. He says it looks like a son of the gods. Nebuchadnezzar calls them out. The three men step out of the kiln and stand in the cool air. The text in Daniel chapter 3 goes out of its way to note the absolute sensory impossibility of the moment. The governors and counselors crowd around them, touching their arms, smelling their clothes. Not a single hair on their heads is singed. Their woolen coats are perfectly intact. They do not even smell like smoke. The pattern of the desert has escalated. The fire in Babylon is not a weapon of the empire. It is the sanctuary of the exile. The bramble in the desert did not burn. The mountain in the wilderness did not melt. The golden branches in the holy place were not consumed. And now, for the first time, the fire has wrapped itself completely around human flesh. God is proving that His presence can surround His people in the most hostile, destructive environments on earth, and they will not be unmade. He can hold them inside the flame. He can become the flame. But Babylon was still just a rescue. The fire protected them, but it remained external. The men walked out of the furnace, and the fire stayed behind. Of Acts, you start to realize something the magic trick reading completely misses. The burning bush is not a one-time anomaly. In the brick, centuries later, in a crowded upper room in Jerusalem, the wind is going to change. The flame is going to fall one more time. And this time, it is not going to stay on the outside. 50 days pass. The empire watches. The disciples wait. They sit in an upper room in Jerusalem. The windows are closed. The air is still. Then the atmosphere cracks open. Acts chapter 2 describes a sound like a violent, rushing wind. It tears through the stone house. It rattles the wooden beams. It fills the room with invisible pressure. And then the visual arrives. Luke writes that they saw what seemed to be tongues of fire. The flame drops into the room. It does not ignite the timber. It does not scorch the ceiling. It moves directly toward the fishermen, the tax collectors, the women, the zealots. It settles on their heads, and their skin does not blister. The hair does not singe. The English translation says the fire separated or divided and came to rest on them. But the Greek text is doing something much more precise. The word Luke uses is the Greek diamorizomenai. It is a participle built from the root verb diamorizo. It means to distribute, to apportion, to take a single, massive inheritance and share it equally. It is a theological blueprint. The place to start is with the nature of the fire itself, among many recipients. Look at its range of meaning. It appears in the Gospels when the Roman soldiers cast lots to divide garments. It is a precise, calculated act of allocation. The fire does not just randomly splinter. It is deliberately allocated. The single flame of the Sinai rock distributes itself into 120 pieces. The burning bush replicates. This insight changes the entire architecture of the biblical story. Under the Old Covenant, the fire stayed on the mountain. It stayed behind the heavy temple veil. It stayed on the golden branches of the menorah. The people stood outside. They watched the smoke. They kept their distance. But the Pentecost flame shatters that geography. The fire is no longer a physical destination. It is an anatomical reality. The Sene is no longer a thorny bramble in the Midianite dirt. The human body is now the bush. God takes weak, frail, mortal flesh and makes it the exact vessel for His unconsuming glory. He dwells in the weakness. He does not destroy the weak thing. The fire is not an external spectacle. It is an internal possession. You become the holy ground. You carry the active presence. The Ehyeh, the I am, the one who is actively present, is now walking around the streets of Rome. We think of fire as an agent of consumption. We think of it as a hungry thing that eats fuel. Corinth and Ephesus inside the rib cages of ordinary people. But there is a catch to carrying this kind of fire. Because while the divine flame does not consume its vessel, human beings are incredibly fragile. We live in a culture that runs on a completely different, highly destructive fuel source. And when those two realities collide in your daily life, it creates a very modern, very devastating paradox. You know the feeling of the modern altar. It is the blue light of a screen at 2 a.m. It is the crushing weight of a deadline that feels like a life or death sentence. It is the endless, grinding anxiety that, if you stop moving, if you stop producing, if you stop proving your worth, you will simply cease to matter. We use a specific word for this. We call it burnout. We treat it as a mechanical failure. We assume we are like a lamp that ran out of oil. We tell ourselves that we just need to rest, take a vacation, sleep for a week, and then we can get back to the work of consuming ourselves. We think we have run out of fuel, but that is not the reality. Burnout is not a lack of fuel. It is a misalignment of fire. The world runs on a fire that consumes. It runs on the fire of approval, of comparison, of acquisition. It is a fire that demands everything you have: your health, your time, your sanity, until there is nothing left but white ash blowing across cold dirt. In the ancient world, fire was the ultimate force of unmaking, and leaves nothing behind but the white ash of a life that was spent on things that were never meant to sustain you. It is a fire that hates the vessel. It devours the bush. You are currently trying to host the unconsuming fire of the living God, inside a system that is designed to incinerate you. The human bush was built to hold a fire that makes you more alive, not less. It was built to hold a fire that sustains the branches rather than turning them to charcoal. When you feel that brittle, hollowed-out sensation in your chest, you are experiencing the friction of two opposing kingdoms trying to occupy the same space. You are trying to fuel a divine purpose with a worldly furnace. If you have ever felt like you are at the end of your rope, like the light you are carrying is dimming because the weight of the work is finally crushing the structure of your life, you are not failing. You are experiencing the collision. You are a bush built for glory, trying to survive on the smoke of ego. But there is a pattern for this. 2. Because even the greatest voices in the text, the men and women who stood on the holy ground and carried the presence of God, eventually hit a wall where they could no longer hear the fire. They hit a moment where the heat of the world finally became louder than the voice in the flame. It took what was complex and reduced it to dust. Moses knows this better than anyone. He is 80 years old, and it happened to a man who was arguably the greatest prophet to ever walk the sand. Elijah runs into the wilderness. He has just called down a massive column of fire on Mount Carmel. It was a terrifying, consuming flame. It incinerated the sacrificial bull, the wet wood, the stone altar, and the very water in the dirt trench. It was a spectacular display of cosmic authority, but a spectacle is not a sanctuary. One day later, the adrenaline fades, and a death threat from the queen arrives. Elias snaps. He flees into the barren desert and collapses under the thin shade of a solitary broom tree. The sun is blinding. The dust clings to the sweat on his face. He closes his eyes and asks God to take his life. He is not asking to die because he has lost his faith. He is asking to die because he is burning the wrong fuel. He expected the consuming fire of Carmel to change the empire. It didn't. The throne is still corrupt. The culture is still hostile. The grand, destructive fire accomplished nothing lasting in the hearts of the people. So God does not give him another spectacle. God gives him a nap. An angel wakes him, feeds him flatbread baked over hot coals, gives him a jar of water, and sends him walking for 40 days. And look at where God sends him. He walks all the way. The Midianite desert is brutal. A landscape of jagged rock and unforgiving heat. The wind is dry, constantly stinging his eyes with grit, to Mount Horeb, the exact same mountain where Moses saw the thorn bush. Elijah stands at the mouth of a cave on the holy rock. God is about to show his prophet the difference between the fire that destroys and the fire that dwells. A hurricane-force wind tears the granite apart, sending loose stone crashing into the valley. But God is not in the wind. An earthquake violently shakes the ground. But God is not in the earthquake. A blinding fire sweeps across the ridge, hot enough to crack the rock. But God is not in the fire. Then comes a low, quiet whisper, a sound of sheer silence. Elijah wraps his face in his heavy woolen cloak and steps out of the cave. He knows exactly what this is. The consuming fire of Carmel was a weapon. It was necessary for a single moment, but it could not build a home. The unconsuming whisper at Horeb is a presence. It is the same gentle, sustaining reality that held the fragile green leaves of the Sinai together centuries earlier without turning them to ash. If you are chronically exhausted, it is likely because you have been trying to live on the adrenaline of Carmel. You are trying to sustain your life on the spectacular, the visible, the loud, consuming fires of achievement, production, and public validation. But the human bush cannot survive on that kind of heat. It will hollow you out. To survive the wilderness, he has spent 4 decades watching things dry out and die in this wasteland. He knows exactly how fire works in the wilderness. You have to go back to the original pattern. You have to step away from the noise and trace the unconsuming fire, all the way from the dirt of Midian, through the veil of the temple, directly into the human chest. A lowly desert weed caught fire, and a fugitive shepherd learned the name of God. A granite mountain vanished in smoke, and a runaway nation walked into a holy covenant. A golden tree burned in the dark, and the divine presence moved freely through the wasteland. A Babylonian kiln was heated 7 times over, and 3 bound exiles found a 4th man walking. A rush of wind tore through an upper room, and the eternal flame was distributed onto human flesh. A broken prophet fled to a mountain cave, and a whisper of silence sustained his life. A fragile, failing human body carries the blinding glory of its maker, and the vessel is not consumed. Same fire, same physics. But maybe the part that stays with me most is the Sinai, the original vessel in the dirt. It takes, it devours. But then he sees it, a flicker of intense, impossible light caught in a tangle of desert scrub. God could have chosen a towering cedar of Lebanon to make his point. He could have chosen a fruitful olive tree that could prove its worth, or waited for a polished marble sanctuary to be built in Jerusalem. Instead, he chose a knot of brittle, hostile briars. He chose the weed that catches the wool of passing sheep, the lowest, most despised piece of vegetation in the entire wilderness hierarchy. And that is exactly what the divine glory chose to inhabit first. If you are in a season where you feel too fragile, too thorny, or too exhausted to carry the calling on your life, the book of Exodus is a place to sit. The fire does not require your perfection. It does not demand your strength. It is not asking you to become a cedar. You do not have to generate the heat. You only have to hold the light. And may the God who looks at the broken, tangled, overlooked places of this world and calls them holy ground, wrap you in a fire that warms you without destroying you and bring you out carrying a name you could not have learned any other way. If this opens something up for you, subscribe. Leave a comment, even one word helps. Share this with someone who is running on empty right now. Pray for us as we keep digging into these texts. He takes a step closer. You can hear the crunch of loose gravel beneath his leather sandals. A mountain shakes under a canopy of dark clouds, wrapped in smoke so thick you can taste the ash. He expects to hear the violent crackle of burning wood. He expects the sharp, bitter smell of boiling sap and black smoke. Instead, the leaves remain perfectly green. The branches do not wither. The thorns stay sharp against the blinding light. The flame lives, but the bush does not die. Moses takes off his shoes. He is standing on holy ground, but he is also standing at the beginning of a pattern that will echo through the rest of the biblical text. The flame that rests upon the bush, without destroying it, is the physical introduction to a God who wants to dwell inside his creation, without consuming his creation. It is a paradox that will eventually reshape the entire cosmos. But the first clue to how this paradox works is not found in the fire. It is found in the dirt. To understand what this flame is actually saying, you have to look past the light. and look directly at the specific, unimpressive, unremarkable weed God chose to occupy. The detail that changes everything is not the flame itself. It is the real estate the flame chooses to occupy. Exodus chapter 3, verse 2 tells us that the presence of God appeared in a blazing fire from the middle of a bush, in the morning air. Yet the rock itself remains uncharred. 3 men are pushed into a Babylonian furnace. In our modern imaginations, fueled by centuries of classical paintings, we tend to picture a lush, green shrub. We imagine a dignified, sturdy plant sitting against the sand. But the brutal terrain of the ancient Near East does not grow dignified plants. It grows survivors. The word the text uses here for bush is the Hebrew seneh. It is an incredibly rare word. It only appears in this specific narrative, and once more, at the very end of Deuteronomy. When Moses is an old man looking back on this exact encounter, seneh does not describe a majestic cedar of Lebanon or a fruitful olive tree. It translates literally to a bramble, a thorn bush. If you have ever walked through an arid landscape, you know exactly what this looks and feels like. It is a knot of brittle, hostile briars. It is a tangled weed that catches the wool of passing sheep and tears the skin of the shepherd who tries to pull it free. It produces no fruit, offers almost no shade, and holds absolutely no economic value. It is the lowest, most despised piece of vegetation in the entire wilderness hierarchy. And yet, this is the exact vessel the divine glory chooses to inhabit. Linguists and biblical scholars have long pointed out a haunting phonetic connection hiding just beneath the surface of the Hebrew text. The heat, so violent, it blisters the faces of the executioners. But the fire refuses to consume even the threads of their coats. The thorn bush is the Sinai, and the mountain where this is happening. The mountain where God will soon bring an entire nation to meet him is Sinai. The linguistic echo tying the lowly scrub to the holy mountain is impossible to unhear once you notice it. Why a bramble? At this exact moment in history, the Israelites are slaves in Egypt. They are making bricks in the mud, crushed under the weight of Pharaoh's empire, entangled in a bitter, brutal existence. The bush is a mirror. God is showing Moses exactly the kind of people he has come to rescue. He is proving that his presence does not require pristine conditions, flawless moral records, or polished marble sanctuaries to manifest. The Seneh is not a random piece of desert flora. It is a divine commentary on human weakness. God takes up residence in the thorny, the broken, and the overlooked. He infuses the worthless bramble with his blinding glory, and instead of incinerating its fragile, dry branches, he sustains them. He dwells within the weakness, without destroying the weak thing. The fire in the single thorn bush is stunning. But that echo does not stop there, because the bush was never meant to be the final container. The small, localized flame flickering in the dirt was simply a miniature-scale model for what was about to happen to the entire horizon. A rush of wind tears through an upper room in Jerusalem, and tongues of flame drop onto the heads. A few months pass. The plagues fall. The sea splits. The empire collapses. Moses leads 1 million runaway slaves back to the exact same coordinates. They cross the sand. They camp at the base of the rock. They wait. And then the mountain explodes. Exodus 19 describes a scene of absolute sensory overload. The sky turns completely black. The ground violently shakes under their feet. A trumpet blast rips through the camp, growing louder and louder until it vibrates in their teeth. The air smells like a massive furnace. The text says, "The Lord descends on Mount Sinai in fire." The smoke billows up like the smoke of a kiln. The entire peak is engulfed in a blinding, terrifying inferno. Look at the visual parallel. One shepherd sees a localized flame in a tiny thorn bush. Now, a whole nation sees a colossal flame wrapping the entire mountain. The Sinai rock is the macro bush. The logic of the desert weed scales up to the geography of the rock. God descends upon the earth. The earth is enveloped in his blinding, consuming glory. But the granite does not melt. The dirt does not incinerate. The planet is not destroyed by the weight of its maker. This is the paradox of the unconsuming fire, playing out on a national scale, of terrified fishermen, leaving not a single scorch mark on their skin. Same fire, same strange physics. The Israelites stand at the boundary line, trembling. They beg Moses to make the voice stop. They back away from the heat. They are completely convinced that if they touch the mountain, they will turn to ash. They do not understand the physics of this flame yet. They think the fire has come to erase them. The fire on the mountain is not a threat of destruction. It is a wedding ceremony. God is wrapping his people in the same protective, unburning light that he wrapped around the Sinai. He is demonstrating that a holy God can dwell with a broken people without tearing them apart. The flame that rested on the bramble now rests on the camp. The fire is terrifying. The fire is deafening, but the fire is safe. But a mountain is stationary. A massive rock cannot move. A nation of nomads cannot stay camped at the base of a glowing peak forever. They have to march. They have to walk through a brutal, unforgiving wilderness to reach the land they were promised. If the presence is going to stay with them, the geography has to change. The fire has to become portable. And to do that, God has to give them a name to carry and a new bush to build. Most people read the story of the burning bush in Exodus 3 as an isolated miracle. The mountain cannot move, but the presence must. And the key to how this presence travels is hidden in the conversation Moses has back at the original thorn bush. Exodus chapter 3, verse 13. Moses is staring at the fire that will not die, and he asks a deeply practical question. He says, "When I go to the Israelites in Egypt, and they ask, 'Who sent me?' What is your name?" The English translation gives us a famous, slightly cryptic answer. "I am who I am." But the word God speaks from the fire is the Hebrew ehyeh. It is the first-person form of the root verb haya, which means to be, to exist, or to happen. It appears throughout the biblical text. But here, it is doing something utterly unique. Ehyeh Asher. Ehyeh is an active, continuous, unfolding state of being. Scholars point out it is closer to "I will be what I will be," or "I am the one who is actively present." The name is not a label. It is a promise of proximity. God is telling Moses that his fundamental identity is defined by his active, unconsuming presence with his people. But if the people are going to march through the sand, they assume it is a simple magic trick in the desert. A theatrical display designed purely to get a fugitive shepherd's attention. That presence needs a physical vessel. Look at the architectural blueprints God dictates in Exodus 25 for the inner sanctum of the tabernacle. He commands them to build a lampstand, a menorah, hammered out of pure gold. But notice the specific botanical vocabulary. He tells the craftsmen to hammer out cups shaped like almond flowers, complete with calyxes and petals. He tells them to craft branches and a central trunk. They are building a stylized metal tree. The menorah is not just a piece of furniture to light a dark room. It is a portable burning bush. If realizing that the menorah is literally a mobile replica of the Sinai thorn bush is stirring up questions you've never considered, you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe. Because every week we go deeper into the text than you knew was possible. So, the artisans hammer the gold. They shape the branches. They fill the almond cups with pure, cold-pressed olive oil. And they light the wicks in the windowless holy place. The golden bush burns continuously, carrying the unconsuming fire with them through the wilderness without incinerating the camp. And it does carry that weight. It stops Moses in his tracks. But if you look closer at the Hebrew vocabulary used to describe the flame, the presence is secured, and the theological pattern is set. But centuries later, the borders fall and the empire shifts. The fire is going to show up again, and this time, the stakes are not a bush or a mountain. This time, the fire is going to test human flesh. Babylon is a city built on consumption. It eats entire nations. It eats identities. King Nebuchadnezzar erects a towering monument of gold on the plain of Dura and demands that every knee hit the dirt the moment the instruments play. 3 Hebrew exiles, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, refuse to bow. They stand upright in a sea of kneeling bodies. The king is furious. He orders the furnace heated 7 times hotter than normal. The executioners bind the wrists and ankles of the 3 men. The heat radiating from the brick kiln is so violent it blisters the skin of the soldiers before they even reach the edge. The guards collapse, killed by the sheer ambient temperature. As the 3 exiles fall bound into the roaring dark, you can hear the deafening crackle of combustion. You expect the bitter, heavy smell of burning hair and melting flesh, but the king suddenly leaps to his feet. He stares into the white-hot center of the flame. He does not see 3 corpses turning to ash. He sees 4 men walking. The ropes are entirely gone, burned away by the heat, but the men themselves are walking freely.